Thank you for joining me for Quick Hits Extended. I'm Dr. Robyn. I'm a high-performance psychologist at Champion Performance Development. With me today, I have Jim Lee, a futurist from StratFi, Rick Alcantara, who is the principal of Rick Alcantara Consulting and the Executive Communications Director at Princeton Strategic Communications. I also have Dr. Rod Wallace, who is the co-founder of the Foundation for Innovation in Healthy Foods and Coalition for Grain Fiber. He is an executive strategist and economist. Ooh, that's a mouthful, you guys. So the first thing I want to say is we're going to talk about what to think about when you think about the future. And I have a question. What's the difference between an investment and a speculation? Jim, I think this one's in your wheelhouse.
Sure,
You want to kick us off?
Yeah, you bet. So when I think about a speculation, it's typically based on short-term sentiment and trends, momentum, buzz, all of these things. And when I think about investments, I think about long-term fundamentals. I think about profitability, accounting, valuations. It's going to be a lot more of a buy and hold versus a here today, gone tomorrow kind of thing.
Okay, that's a great place to kick us off. Rod, Rick, where would you like to go from there?
That's interesting, Jim. So how have speculation and investment and the relationship between the two of them, how would you characterize the change of that over like the last 25 years?
Oh, or over the last 5 months? Why not? I mean, we can really shorten that whole thing up quite a bit. And, that's part of the thing with rising interest rates, okay? With higher interest rates, it tends to make people more impatient for profits, as it were. So a year ago, when we had all these SPACs going public, they weren't expected to make any money, have any earnings until 5 years from now. People were okay with that because when interest rates are at zero, making profitability in 5 years is kind of the same thing as making it next week, okay? But when you start raising the bar on interest rates, it messes with your discounting in your valuation. So all of a sudden, earning something in 5 years is not the same thing as earning it today. And that's why we've seen a fundamental collapse in the growth stocks over the course of the last, again, about 5 months or so.
So how about that same interest rate today versus in the 1970s? Do you think that it would be, given that the same numbers and the discount rate in the 1970s or today, you'd have the same type of pattern, or how would the difference be if we're talking about the future, 1970, 2022, and 2052?
Well, it's not the 70s yet, okay? I think we've wound back the clock about 10 years, not like 50 at this point, but about 10 years. And, the market's down about 15% year to date on the S&P, a lot worse on the NASDAQ. But I think we'll survive 5% interest rates on mortgages. I mean, we have seen this before in our lifetimes. This is not a particularly new thing. What was remarkable about the 70s was that they introduced a new metric known as the misery index. Okay, I don't know if you remember this one or not, but the misery index was equal to the inflation rate plus the unemployment rate. And it was well into the double digits, which made the 70s miserable for everything but like disco, okay? So now we have pretty much full employment. It's really hard to find people. And inflation's around 8%. And that's one of the reasons why the Federal Reserve is comfortable tweaking up interest rates, because it's really hard to have a hard downturn with full employment, okay? And we have full employment right now. So people are a little nervous, a little bit of panic in the air, but interest rates, yeah, they have room to go up a little bit further. And we've seen this before.
And here I thought the misery index was basically tied to my honeydew list and how much I got done or didn't get done.
That's the personal misery index. Yes, that's the PMI. personal misery index right there.
Yes, exactly. Well, I look at your investment question differently. I look at it from a corporate standpoint, and what does the company invest in itself? What does it invest in its people? And what does it do to invest for the long term? And what impact is that going to have, not only on their profitability, but also their place in the community they operate in, or their place in the global community? And very, very different. And, companies that will invest in their employees, not just by, providing higher wages or providing more, benefits or incentives, but investing in them and their professional development, in their skills and in the workplace, and providing a comfortable environment. And now, accommodating people who now have become accustomed to working remotely is very important, and kind of walking the walk. If you say that, you are a sustainable company, do you actually back it up with your actions? If you say you support certain causes, are you backing those up with money and investment and people and resources? Or are you just talking the talk? And if you're just doing that, you're going backwards. And this is why, some companies have very high turnover, because they're just not investing in their workforce. They're not investing in the future. They're looking at the short-term quarter profits, and that's all they're really focused on. And the companies that really have done a great job of investing in their employees, or, for example, Patagonia or Apple, and of course, by doing that, you see that they have great profitability.
So that makes me want to ask a question. When we talk about the future, how far out are we talking?
I think that I'll answer some of Jim's answer with that. It's a lot less far than it used to be. And it's both because of the interest rates and because it's just a lot more difficult to figure out what's going to happen. That technology has sped things up. I mean, everyone talks about it. And if you're going back to, 2000 years ago, and we're in the very early stages of the agricultural revolution, and people were beginning to learn how to farm farms and how to put laws into place, you can pretty much guess that like 5-10 years from now is going to be the same as this year, except for a lot of people will have died because they just starved to death, or they weren't able to survive. And now we have this completely different situation in which the technology is advancing at infinitely fast rates. And if you think about just even 2 or 3 years ago, we were focused on, a beginning of COVID began 2.5 years ago, right? And we can barely even remember what that was like before COVID. I mean, I have kids that they're like, what do you mean? This is the first time I've ever not worn a mask to school, like the last few weeks. I mean, they can't even remember what that's like. And now we're in the middle of discussion about the Ukraine and Russia, and 6 months from now, it'll be something completely different. And as the things have this change is accelerated, and the society has gotten a lot more complicated, so that the ways in which this war in Europe is going to influence society and the economy and politics is very difficult to interpret. We've had to get shorter term and looking at things, but we also, and this is one of the things that we're a little bit struggling with, we need to at the same time also get even longer term, because we can't deal with, if you only live your life in 3-day increments, you're not even going to finish high school. But if you're looking really far, you know what, I want to have a strong position in society, whatever that means, then you're going to invest in things like ethics. You're going to invest in things like morals. You're going to invest in learning for yourself, and not knowing exactly what your job's going to be in 6 months or 12 months, but knowing 20 years from now, you're going to be an upstanding person in society. And the same exact thing happens with businesses and with society overall, is that we can't help but look short term because we can't see longer. At the same point, it's more and more critical that we do at least have a vision of what that future should look like.
So then what do we expect from companies? Because Rick, to your point, and I agree with you, companies invest in the short term because stockholders need their money right now. Jim, they need their money right now. But the long term is better for the health of the company if you look at it and invest for the long term. what are the difference? Like short term is 6 months, long term is 5 years. I don't know. As a layperson, I don't know.
I'll defer to Jim from the financial standpoint.
Oh, I was going to defer to you because you work with the public. So yeah.
Well, just,
You can both answer.
On the ethics side and on the morality side that Rod talked about, I mean, it's not going to happen overnight. It's going to take time. But the real key there is, are you just doing this as an initiative, or is it really core to your business? And is it ingrained in your mission statement? And do you embody the values that you have there? So, it could take time, but you need a leadership team that's committed to doing it. They're going to back it up with actions, and they're going to back it up with money.
And let me answer, give maybe Jim, maybe you'll have something to build off with this, that companies at the one point have to invest shorter term. At the same point, the worst thing that a company can do is just completely disappear from their shareholders' perspective. Once you're bankrupt, you're done. You are worth nothing, and you're never going to be worth anything in the future.
Right.
And if you're not taking the steps today to have that vision of how you are going to help society, which is the long-term vision, you're going to bump around for a little while, and then you're going to make a misstep, and then you're gone. And so it really is alignment of shareholder interest and societal interest. And it is, I would say that the skilled manager is the one that is able to do both and say, yes, we've got to invest for the short term, but we have to also have this long-term vision about what we are doing for society, or we're gone.
Sure. Yeah. Winning is not losing. Correct. That's sort of where it all starts. And there's something really interesting going on here, in that human life expectancy, generally speaking, has been increasing over the last few decades. But organizational life expectancy has been going in the other direction. And right now, the lifespan of a typical organization is estimated to be around 15 years before they get bought out, sell out, or die out. And that's not the length of the average career now. I mean, you talk to a millennial or a Gen Zer, and they expect to stay at their current job for like 3 years, and they're good, and that's a really low hurdle rate. But I think that may explain why self-development and career training and education has shifted to the individual versus from the organization. And I'm not saying that's a good thing. I'm just saying that seems to be what we're seeing right now.
Pick up on Rod's point when you talk about a company not doing what it's supposed to do and not thinking ahead to the future. A lot of the work I do is in crisis planning. So if a company is not anticipating what could go wrong, they could just really implode because of some major disaster, either caused by somebody internally or some external force. I mean, you just take, for example, what's going on with Abbott in the baby formula situation. I mean, what was the backup plan, if their facility was ever, not able to produce product? What was the plan, how they were going to communicate about this? So whatever the situation could be, it could be a natural disaster, it could be a fire, it could be insider trading. If you haven't thought about what you're going to do and how you're going to respond, your brand is going to crater. And then, of course, now your shareholders start screaming, and everybody wants a piece of the CEO and wants the leadership team fired, and your stock implodes.
Yeah, and let me bring things shorter term and longer term also with that people's life expectancy in developed countries has been generally extending for the last 30 years, slowly. I believe 3 out of the last 5 years, American life expectancy has shrunk, though.
Isn't that interesting?
It's spectacular, and it's about suicides. It's about cardiovascular disease, diabetes.
Yeah.
One of the
lifestyle diseases. Yeah.
And with the Coalition for Grain Fiber, that's one of the things that we're working on, because the average cost linked with cardiovascular disease and diabetes for a family with 5 people is more than $10,000 a year. Some of that's healthcare costs. Some of that's indirect costs. Some of that is high health insurance premiums that we're paying. Some of it's taxes that we're paying for the government to pay for that. But it's $10,000 for a family. And one of the things that the scientists that we're working with have said is that, there are at least some of the healthier fibers that we eat. Just a little bit increase of that could decrease that by 10%. It's $1,000 per family for every family in the United States. And the reason that we're not doing it today is because it just takes a slightly different view on how to make profit. Businesses can do this profitably. We're gathering businesses to do this in a profitable way. But it does take a little bit of an innovative approach to it. And there are opportunities by looking at where we are today and some of these failures. And if we say, you know what, every solution to a failure is value created for society, there are billions of dollars of opportunities just sitting there right in front of us. It's not about new technology. It's about looking at things a little bit differently and saying, you know what, we don't have enough fiber. So how about we create a mechanism so that companies can add a little bit of fiber. It's about $50,000 of benefit for $1 of investment. We can find ways to cover that with nonprofits or the government or other things. And there are opportunities like this sitting in multiple areas of society. Is it long-term investment? By some perspectives, it is. On the same point, people today are hungry for solutions to our big issues. Elon Musk recently said, you know, why is it that for his companies, he's able to get spectacularly skilled technicians? It's because people are attracted to solving the most challenging problems for society. And a lot of what he goes after are challenging problems. Whatever you think about Elon Musk, that's one thing that you'd have to give him. And the same thing is true with these other issues. You know, the quality of food. We got 47,000 foods in the supermarket, but we're not nourishing ourselves. These are really interesting problems. We know how to get nutritious food from a science perspective. We can do that. Our houses are amazing. We got really high quality houses anywhere we decide to build them. And yet we've lost 40% of economic growth because we're not building houses in Silicon Valley, for example. There's tons of open land in Silicon Valley. There's lots of opportunities. It is a long-term method to get there. But if you open your eyes, companies can find ways to begin to use public relations and marketing and creative organizational structures to make these opportunities benefit their shareholders in the short term and solve these longer term problems.
Yeah, you almost, sorry.
No, go ahead, Jim.
Yeah, you almost sort of wonder at what point does the standard American diet become kind of a mental health issue? You know, maybe we're just consuming all of these foods as kind of self-medication of some sort because, you know, we're sad or kind of going through things or whatever. So we go into a high salt, high fat kind of diet. But one thing that I've been kind of kicking around is this idea of science food. You know, the last decade was all about organic. It was about clean food and it was about, you know, eating close to home. But I kind of wonder if the next decade will be spending optimizing human performance and optimizing our food. And I would just love to hear some thoughts on that. And I know Robyn has a background in health and diet, so that would be interesting.
Well, and I was going to say off of what Rod said, that the profit involved in making food, and I use that term very broadly, hit the bliss point so that people can't not eat it. It turns on the whole cram function. It makes you crave it. And they use it as marketing. I see it. Foods you can crave. Why would you do that to people? But there's so much profit in it. So I'm wondering, how do you make a company look at the better wellness for the nation at the expense of their profit?
I disagree. I disagree with that assumption that you can't do it profitably, because one of the ways I actually spoke with Rick with some of these organizations in which in the food industry, there has been a statement that I've heard a number of times. I worked with one of the largest food manufacturers for a decade. And they said, you know, the reason that we can't sell more healthful food profitably is because consumers don't choose it. They choose the unhealthy food. And we actually disagree with that assertion because we had actually, there's the organization that I'm working with, the Foundation for Innovation in Healthy Food. It began with a challenge from an economist who shared the Nobel Peace Prize. And he said, most effort to enhance food health has been focused on plan A: educate consumers, inform them about which foods are healthy, and then assume that you're going to get better outcomes. And we failed miserably. And the reality is that, okay, we have to realize that most people don't look at food as a combination of macro and micronutrients.
No.
That's what scientists do,
Right.
or nutritionists. Most people look at food as an experience. And we need to support and protect that experience. Food companies need to, but they can still make the food healthier within that experience. And that's where we focused, is saying, no, what's plan B? Let's assume that consumers aren't going to choose healthier foods. Let's say that we know in a number of different instances how to deliver healthier foods that will still be enjoyable in the same way. And let's assume that and realize that there's a lot of people that care about public health that aren't consumers. Some people in the healthcare industry really would like to support healthier food. Many governments would like to help support healthier food, many nonprofits. So let's get them involved and engaged with the food companies. Find the ways. With this, we're working on this, the Coalition for Grain Fiber. It looks like $500 in benefit for each penny invested. We don't need that much invested from people who care about public health to find ways to make it profitable for the food company to enhance the level of fiber that you get in bread.
So is that to Jim's point then, that it becomes science, not food? And I don't know where that line is. Is food grown? Is it science? But if we have to create food that people will choose as opposed to the unhealthy stuff they're choosing, does it then become science and not food?
And it's also policy, because if you think about where our diet went off the rails, it was in the 1970s, largely as a response to concerns about global overpopulation, right? And so you had the Nixon administration subsidizing the corn, the soy, the cattle industry, because he taught us to eat as if we're starving. And he wanted to create the most food for everyone using America's competitive strengths. And as a result of that, our diet shifted because of some of those public policies that were instituted 40 years ago.
Rick, you're the corporate guy here. When you hear this, what comes to mind for you?
Well, I think both on the government side and the corporate side, I think one of the biggest challenges is taking a holistic approach to how you operate. And you're looking at issues that may not necessarily directly impact your business or your government agency, but how does it fit into everything else that's going on? So you're looking at things like, we're talking about the food situation, we're talking about climate control, talk about an aging population. Jim talks about a lot of this stuff in his recent book. And, anticipating what's going to happen with each of these things 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 15 years from now. And if you can anticipate the right way, of course, you can invest in a business and make profit and invest in those stocks, right, Jim?
Yeah. So we have a few minutes left. We have about 7 minutes left. I would like to ask each of you specifically, when you think about the future, what do you think we should be thinking about? Do you have something that we should consider, lay people or otherwise, that we should think about? Rod, would you like to kick that question off?
Yeah, it's a question that I looked at, and I spent a couple of years with my book, Drowning in Potential: How American Society Can Survive Digital Technology. And as an individual, the most important thing that we can do is support the organization, support the culture, in expecting everyone to have some value for doing the right thing. Get your profit, but do it in a way that's actually going to create value for people. And at a minimum, look at alternate ways that could create more value for everyone as a way to get your profit. Get the most profit that you can, but you are going to be missing opportunities to benefit your shareholders if you just assume that no one can answer these tough problems for society. And you need, as a consumer, to tell your organizations, have you really looked at it and ensured that you cannot do something positive for society and benefit your shareholders at the same time?
My little brain gets all twisted around that, because for me, what the way that I have been conditioned is that the thing that's the worst for the environment and worst for the long term and worst for the people is where the most money is. And I hate that. I hate that I've been conditioned that way.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and the thing I think about is, and because I'm in the industry, is what's the future of media? Globally, you have leaders, especially in authoritarian, countries, basically saying that the media is the enemy of the people, and you heard it here as well in the last couple of years. And the future of journalism is really at risk. A lot of local papers are being bought up by vulture capital firms and basically breaking them off and selling off the pieces and gutting them to the point where there's really nothing left of the papers. We see that in the Pottstown Mercury, for example. It used to have 70 plus reporters. Now they're down to a handful. So those same people now have to cover all of those old beats. So the local news is disappearing. And when local news disappears, there's nobody holding politicians accountable. So politicians basically can run unfettered, do what they want without anybody fact checking them, without following up on them and seeing where they're spending, your money and my money. So it's going to be a big problem. And I see it continuing because papers are struggling. It costs too much to print paper. They're moving to digital, of course, but they're trying to find ways to get subscribers to pay for those digital subscriptions after years of giving it away for nothing. And as more and more papers disappear in the US in particular, you're going to have more and more folks just kind of honed in on one set of messages, because you're going to have these big corporations that own, hundreds of outlets, and, you're going to get their viewpoint, and you're not going to get alternative viewpoints. So it's going to be very, very interesting to see how this plays out over the next couple of years.
Yeah, I had not considered the fact that local news is disappearing. You're absolutely right. Thank you. I appreciate that. Something for me to think about. Jim.
Yeah. Well, I think it's important to have a positive vision of the future, in that it's a lot better psychologically if you're working towards something with a goal in mind, and that applies to individuals and that applies to groups as well. So, do what you can to make it a better place, right?
I agree with that. I think it's hard to do. I don't think, I'm going to wrap it up by saying this. I don't think we answered how long the future is. Like, I don't know what short-term and long-term. I asked that question. I don't think I have an answer. So I think that that's going to be a challenge for me coming out of this conversation, is I'm not sure when I think about the future, how far out I'm thinking. So that's a tough one for me. If you have a quick answer, I'd love to hear it.
The future is faster than you think.
Yeah, Rod made that point. The future is faster than you think. I absolutely agree with that. And I do feel like my worldview, and I'm just one person, but my worldview is so negative to where, like, what I expect from corporations, what I think people will do, where people get their profit. And I would love to see data, information, something to help me change that, because I'm certainly not seeing that. When I think about the future, I think about having to fight against huge corporations who are killing the planet, killing the people, and raking in their profits. So that for me is kind of where the future is headed. I hope I'm wrong.
And I think Jim's right. If you're looking at, what positive things that companies are doing to move us along, electric cars, for example, are we going to be able to reduce, pollution and the effect we're having on climate? I mean, that's just one example, but there's many of those out there in healthcare and in manufacturing and whatever it is, there are a lot of positive signs. So I think we just got to look for those. But unfortunately, a lot of the negative things tend to outweigh. And of course, media reinforces it because it's
get more of a response.
So they're just going to play on it.
Yeah. And I can't remember which one of you said it, but one of you made the point that personal development is being moved to being personal responsibility rather than corporations, because of how short everybody's staying with organizations.
Exactly.
And I think we have to start taking more responsibility for everything at an individual level. So with that, I would like to thank each of you for spending this half hour with me and having this conversation about the future. I'm really pleased that there are guys like you, people like you in the world who are looking at it in a better way than I do. So thanks so much. And I look forward to having a future conversation with each of you.
Absolutely.
Thanks a lot.